Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella and today I'm going to be discussing all the books that I read in September. I can't keep track of the months anymore. So, for my setup today I figured I'd switch it up a little bit and at least show you off a different part of my shelves, but I've just been kind of sick of staring at the exact same part of my shelves when editing, so I can imagine it's not the most visually exciting thing, so I figured I'd switch it up, sit on the floor, and just do it from here. I have read 9 books in the month of September, which is pretty exciting. I actually have a few days left in September when I'm filming this, so I might insert a clip if I finish another book at the end of this video. There's a good chance I will do so. Also, I participated in Becca's Bookopoly in the month of September, which was really fun. I did end up having to switch up my TBR a little bit, but I still could mess with the prompts to make it work, but reading plans had to change because of a reason, and I'll explain why when I get to it. But I think that's it. Yeah, and let's just jump into it. The first book I completed in September was via audiobook, and that is Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This is a young adult contemporary coming-of-age story about a half Persian, half white boy who doesn't really feel like he fits in, and then he actually ends up going to Iran with his family for the first time ever. I almost loved every single aspect about this story. There was a lot of great discussion about mental health rep. Darius has depression and takes medication for it. I loved the navigating and exploration in Darius's culture and seeing how he fits in and how much he loves the Persian part of himself. And possibly my favorite part of this story was navigating the complicated family relationships and dynamics within the story. Darius has complicated relationships with about everything, and that includes his family. He has a really strained relationship with his father, and them navigating that and learning more about Darius, how he feels, and then eventually how the dad feels. There was a lot of significance packed into there, and I loved the way it was explored. I thought that was like A+, well done. I really love Darius as a main character. He is a deeply feeling and sensitive character, and I found him to be super relatable. The one part I struggled with in this book is the prose. I didn't love it. There is a lot of comparisons to like Lord of the Rings, Star Trek things, and a lot of phrases that get repeated like verbatim, and when you're listening to the audiobook it really sticks out to you. I ended up giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really loved it. I definitely recommend it, and I'm glad I finally read it. The next book I read was The Ask and the Answer by Patrick Ness. This is the sequel to The Knife of Never Letting Go, which I read I think in 2018 or 2017, and I really enjoyed it. It's about Todd, who lives in this like regressed society where women don't exist anymore, and all the men in like this village actually have the ability to hear everyone's thoughts. And then Todd ends up discovering a pocket of quiet, and along with that a girl, and like it turns the whole world upside down, and Todd and Viola have to go on this grand adventure to try and escape. I enjoyed this a lot, but there were some construction issues that I had with it. I think it definitely does the middle book syndrome thing. It keeps the characters apart for far too long, which is deeply annoying. It does drag. It takes a little bit to get the plot finally moving, and this is like 500 pages, so I think it could have been shortened up a little bit. I loved the exploration and discussions of war and what it does to everyone, and like how there is really no morality when you are at war. I continue to love how this takes on toxic masculinity. I love Todd as our main character still. I think he's great. I love that his greatest strengths are his empathy and his willingness to care. I love Todd. And Viola, our other main character, I also adore. I love her strength. She is so just strong and resilient. She goes through a ton of bullshit as well in this book, yet she comes out on the other side strong and ready to fight. And I just love them as a pair of characters, and their relationship is really special. I do look forward to completing the last book, although I'm not too sure when that will be because I don't actually own it. I'm glad though that I finally read this. And I gave it 3.75 out of 5 stars. Forgot to say that. So I really don't want to review this next book, but I have to. Fun. The next book I completed was The Doors of Eden by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was an ARC provided through the publisher via NetGalley, which I thank them for approving me for. I heard about parallel Earths and sapphic women, and I recognized the author's name because he wrote a really popular series called Children of Time or Children of Ruin, one of them. And I hated this book. Absolutely fucking hated this book from start to finish, content to tone. This book sucks. I have a review for it on Goodreads, and I'll have that linked down below if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts. I sat there for a while trying to piece together how much I hated this book, but it was just bad. To start off, the writing was horrendous. It was dense and super, super descriptive, but not in any sort of stylistic way. He just dumps all the information on you when like reading the actual story, and plus excerpts of another book that gets put in here, which just horrendously hurts the pacing of this story. The plot was pretty boring, but I think that was symptomatic of just a poorly written story. And my biggest issue is the characters, both in their lack of development. There is zero development in this story whatsoever. It's a 600-page book. They hardly ever emote or really ever are described as people. They're just kind of like vehicles for the story. But I also deeply have issues with the way that we have a trans side character represented. There was a lot of violence that our trans main character experiences at the hands of our mustache twirling villain, and I believe that's just to make our mustache twirling villain seem even worse. But his actions are never denounced, and what she goes through is horrendous, and I think it was deeply irresponsible and could be very, very harmful to trans readers. So go into that with caution. Look at the trigger warnings. I also have that listed in my Goodreads review because frankly, after I put that review out, I forced it out of my brain. I'm deeply upset by this book. I don't think it was good. I think it was deeply irresponsible, and I gave it 1 star. After that trash fire, I decided I wanted something lighter and happy and something that I could read really quickly, and so I picked up on a whim Peach Read by Emily Henry. This is an adult contemporary romance that focuses on our female main character who recently lost her father, and then also discovers that her father had been cheating on her mother for a large portion of like her childhood and growing up, and she has to grapple with a lot of that. So she ends up moving into this beach house, and right beside it is her rival from college, but they end up challenging each other to write in each other's genres and see who can like sell their book first, and then love happens. I liked that this book took on some heavier topics. I would give a content warning for, like I said, grief, cheating. There is some verbal, emotional, and physical abuse experienced by the male main character that is described as well. I deeply empathize with our female main character and what she was going through. It was very, very tough, and her working through those emotions was tough. And I did appreciate, though, her arc and how she came to rectify with her feelings. I think our love interest needed more development time. Maybe it would have been better if we had his perspective as well, because then we could have seen him actively working on himself. He has experienced a lot of trauma in his childhood and growing up. We don't really get to see him work through it. He at the very end mentions that he's in therapy, but he's still like so fucked up, and I think either he needed to have a longer conversation to his love interest and like us the readers about what he's going through, because he seemed a little bit emotionally stunted and closed off and a bit unhealthy. Like I think he needed to do a bit more work on himself. Our female main character, whose name, sorry, I truly can't remember at this point, she did give a little bit of a vibe of like the not like other romance writers thing. She kind of at times looks down on certain romance writers, and the miscommunications in this book I was deeply annoyed by. They were incredibly childish and just, I think, thrown in there to sort of have some tension and have like the third act breakup. The miscommunications in here were stupid. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I did genuinely really enjoy it. I read it super quickly. I then went and completed The Beauty of Darkness by, holy shit, okay, Mary E. Pearson. This is the third and final book in the Remnant Chronicles trilogy, the first book being The Kiss of Deception, which I really enjoyed a few years ago. I finished this via audio, and while I enjoyed it, I don't think this had what I wanted for it to be a really good finale, unfortunately, which is a bummer. It was far too long for what actually happens in this book, and once we get to the final main conflict, that was over way too fast. This definitely needed some editing and some, I guess, lessons in pacing. There's so much travel in these books, like traveling by horseback from place to place throughout the entire series. The romantic conflicts in here, I felt, were just thrown in here to give us a bit more attention. Like, you knew how the story was going to end, and some of it just felt stupid and thrown in there and out of character. I really liked Leah's overall character arc, though, our main character. She grows a lot, and I really enjoyed watching her become who she is now. I loved how commanding and strong she became. Her arc was actually genuinely one of the best parts of this series. I gave this 3 stars. I think it is my least favorite in the trilogy. It was fine. I'm glad I finished off the series, and I think it's pretty decent for a YA fantasy series, just like not my favorite. Now, in terms of amazing finales, I finally fucking read The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third and final book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I've been intending to finish this series for forever, and I finally did it. I will be posting a full review in the next few weeks. I just wholeheartedly love this series, recommend this series. The first book, the 5th season, takes place after this land is experiencing a season, and a season in this world means that, like, the world is basically ending, and this time the world will be ending for the final time. It's like the epic worst disaster, and our main character discovers her son murdered at the hands of her husband, and she has to go on like this perilous journey to try and save her daughter, who her husband has subsequently kidnapped. This was such an earned finale. Like, you could see how all the threads were finally coming together, and everything just was earned, and that's, I think, one of the best notions of a finale. I really liked and appreciated the tone of the story. I love that this still manages to add to the world and like fit in those final few puzzle pieces. I'll close my window in 1 second. Let me finish talking about this first. But the world building, again, continues to be great even at the final book. I thought the character arcs were fantastic, and I loved the actual final bit in here, and it was a very bittersweet ending, which I think is also a good mark of a good finale. I think I'm giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I then went and picked up Waking Gods by Sylvain Neuvel. This was one of the punishment books from Becca's Bookopoly. I was not looking forward to picking this up because I wasn't a huge fan of the first book, and this one had mixed results, but I do think it was better. So the first book is Sleeping Giants, and it's told in this like case file format, adult science fiction, where at the very beginning of the story, a young girl like discovers this gigantic metal hand in the earth, and then humanity does as humanity would and tries to track down the rest of the robot, to some disastrous consequences. I didn't like the first book. I talked about it in my July wrap-up if you're interested as to why. And a lot of my complaints from the first book are in this one as well. I just personally don't think the case file format is executed very well. It's very difficult to get a grasp on the characters, and there are even times where I had like 4 or 5 characters all friggin' communicating at the same time, and there's no indicator as to who's talking. The stakes were definitely really upped in this one. The plot gets moving really quickly, and that stuff was a lot more entertaining, and the stakes were so high, so you're reading to find out what was going to happen like super quickly. That being said, I was not particularly a fan of like the cliffhanger ending. That just seemed a little unnecessary for me, and I have specific issue with one of our female main characters and the way she was treated and her arc was treated in here. I just didn't like the abrupt 180 and the way that was I don't know, handle. I was just unimpressed. I gave this 3 stars, and I ended up subsequently lowering my rating of Sleeping Giants to 2 stars because I enjoyed this one more, and Sleeping Giants has not held well in my feelings. So the next book is the book that I ended up switching up my TBR for. I think that's a proper sentence. I don't know, moving on. So I initially planned on reading Elantris in September to like read more of the Cosmere, and then I finally decided to research how Brandon Sanderson recommends you read the Cosmere, and I realized I was going about it incorrectly. So he recommends doing the Mistborn trilogy first, which luckily I have done, and then he recommends a novella called The Emperor's Soul. This actually, I think, is technically a bit of a sequel to Elantris, but like I don't think you get spoiled for anything, and that then will prepare you to read The Way of Kings, which is what I've been intending on doing for a while. So I read The Emperor's Soul. This is a, I think, just under 200 pages novella that I thoroughly enjoyed. I knew nothing about it going into it. I've never heard of it, but I loved it and I'm very impressed. This basically follows a sort of con woman in this world who gets captured for doing some like really bad or offensive things to this like grand empire. She's given the opportunity to work on something and then they will set her free, and it's like really, really high stakes. Basically the entire empire is on the line and she has 100 days to do it. I love the magic in here. It was super cool. It had to do with like creating special magical stamps to like imbue powers, and that stuff was super cool to learn about. I loved her sort of mastery of this craft, and in 200 pages I really had a good sense of the magic. I loved it. I really liked the relationship between our main character and one of the like higher ups in this empire. Their relationship was really special and really sweet, and I just liked how both of them are so jaded towards the other, and then they like begrudgingly really start to care for one another. It was very high stakes and really well paced, and I liked the conclusion and the way everything ended. This actually made me really excited for Elantris, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I'm happy I did it. Oh, I also forgot to mention that I really enjoyed the main character and her sort of take on the world. I really enjoyed being in her head and her perspective. And the final thing I read, if I haven't finished Never Let Me Go, is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I've already read this multiple times. This is my 3rd read, I think, of this, and I also decided to go through the audiobook route for this. I'm rereading the Poppy War series in preparation for The Burning God, which we are getting really soon, and I'm excited. I have an entire spoilery gush about the Poppy War if you're interested. I love this series. If you want to hear me talk about it for like 25 minutes, the link will be down below. I just think this series is so special, and every time I read through it I pick up on other things. This is a deeply triggering series, as everyone says. Please look up the trigger warnings before going into this story, and there were certain parts that were more difficult to read this time because I'm now more familiar with the historical context that this was based on. I, for whatever reason, didn't realize that this was based like pulled from some specific events in world history. Experiencing that was incredibly difficult, like even more difficult this time. There's a chapter in here that is so deeply triggering and upsetting. I have more sympathy for certain characters that I hate, even though I still fucking hate them, and I'm still in love with the stupid, dumbass, impulsive, dummy that is Rin. I love her. I don't know what that says about me, but she is so stupid, and I love her, and I cannot wait to see where her arc goes in the final book. So I finished Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. Don't have the book on me right now. Last night, and I have like, I don't know, not a lot of thoughts on it, or I'm not entirely sure what to feel about it, to be entirely honest. Everyone talks about there being a huge twist in regards to Never Let Me Go, but there was no twist, so I was constantly anticipating some sort of twist. Nothing really comes. This book is twisted, yes, and a lot of things happen, but it slowly builds and slowly reveals things but there's no huge twist at the end, so it kind of, I don't know, my expectations were a little bit I guess misleading, and so I kind of felt a little bit unsatisfied by the ending. I did really like the writing and like the atmosphere and element of mystery and intrigue. I'm not entirely sure how I'm rating this. I'm currently thinking about 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really liked it, but because my expectations were so skewed, it did affect my overall enjoyment of reading the story, unfortunately. I just realized I'm not going to be able to do my outro like I normally do. So those are all of the books that I read in September. I'm actually pretty happy with the amount that I read. I read a lot of big books in September, which bodes well for the rest of the year. Let me know if you have any thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I can't do my proper outro, which is really annoying, but I will see you again very soon. Bye!